Along with the National Federation of State High School Associations, the MHSA Executive Board believes the resumption of sports and other activities is crucial to the growth, development, and mental and emotional wellness of our Montana youth.
A lot of work behind the scenes, I'm assuming, a lot of phone calls probably with not only local and state departments, but maybe even some of the out-of-state. The local ones are all, the Dakotas and the Idahos and Wyomings and stuff like that. What led to where we're at by releasing this letter?
Sure, of course, we are always in contact with our state health department and our administration, the governor's office, and then the local health departments too. We can see what they've been doing throughout the summer, especially with Legion Baseball and how that's been going along. And then also looking at our CDC guidelines, National Federation of State High School Associations, Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. I've been on numerous Zooms with all 50 of our executive directors. We go through every week, every Tuesday we have a call, seeing and getting some information from each of their states, because everyone's a little different, but there's some things that we are using from their particular states. And then, of course, our Section 7 and 8, which is our western states. We've been on a lot of Zooms too and pulling some information there. Along with that, have to give a lot of credit to my staff because they've been out looking at their particular sports or activities that they're responsible for and gleaning information from different sources also to see what we can do to help minimize the risk of the transmission of the coronavirus.
That statement that we had you read, how important is that? Trying to get kids back to a sense of normalcy. It's not going to be the same, but obviously the NFHS even thinks that it's important to have the resumption of sports.
It's extremely important, the emotional well-being of our students, for sure. As we're going back to school, and of course there's different models for returning to school as you see throughout the state. Most, I think, will be in a hybrid, where they'll be in school sometime and online learning others. But of course, those local educational leaders are doing their homework too to try to figure out what's best. But once they do get back in there, to get out for a couple hours each evening for practices and then get some competition going, it's extremely important. The studies are showing that now, where they're being able to, from the spring sports areas and spring activities, to say what happened with these kids and what are some of the correlations between no activity participation and their emotional and mental well-being. It's pretty it's the information is that this is an important piece of it.
It's going to be challenging because, like you said, a lot of schools are letting you opt in or out of the in-school. Is the brick and mortar rule still in place where we got rid of the 80% or whatever?
Right. We have a rule in MHSA that says you must be in the school, in the bricks and mortar, for at least 2 periods a day, 10 hours per week. That we actually had our board waive that in May. We knew this was coming, so we wanted to make sure that if there were some schools that were going totally remote but still wanted to provide activities, that they had the opportunity to do that.
And that could be the challenge where some of the schools are also letting you choose. You could do either or. How difficult is that going to be? Just throwing one more wrench into it, I guess, of if a school has 75% in class and the other 25%, and then those doing remote learning are having to show up for the practices afterwards and stuff. It's going to be more challenging than they're used to.
Well, and I think, too, in regard to that, it's a local issue because it may depend on what's going on in that local community at the time. So I think it's all workable. That's what's important for us. It's going to be workable if we take some of these requirements, these restrictions, and the considerations into place. So I think it will be very workable.
The tiers, that was kind of the main stressing point of the email, the letter that you sent out to the schools. Maybe explain those tiers. I don't want to say dumb them down, but for someone like you, that might be a good way to put it.
Well,
explaining what those 5 tiers are and maybe what it would look like to go from tier 1 to tier 3 or all the way down to tier 5.
I first want to give a little bit of credit to Kent Paulson from the Frontier Conference because we have been in contact too. Kent's a great guy, and he was talking about, they were looking at tiers, and I like that terminology. So that's when I started working on the tiers for the MHSA. Tiers simply are saying what's going to happen in the future if some other things come around where there's a interruption of play because of the virus becoming more prevalent in certain communities, or we have an interruption, the governor looks at the information from the state and local health department, says it's time now to pull back a little bit. Well, then what's going to happen to sports and activities? That's what the tiers are about. Tier 1, we're starting. We have all these restrictions and requirements and considerations in place. But let's say we have an interruption. Then we can look at Tier 2 where we're going to cancel non-conference games and then move forward. If we have a longer interruption, we start maybe a longer interruption, then we can look at Tier 3 where we cancel all non-conference games and shorten the conference schedules. Then Tier 4 would be even a longer, maybe we start and play for quite a while and then get a real long interruption. Then we're going to have to look at shortening that conference season, maybe even ending it at that time, and look at different playoff formats. You know, are we going to have a state or divisional and district volleyball tournaments at one side, or are we going to do a playoff, come to one team, you know, the highest seed? So we have all those in place. Tier 5 is where it's been, you know, maybe a tough year like this spring was, but we can maybe have some kind of play at the end and maybe even look at a postseason schedule.
I don't want to jinx anything, but is there an undocumented Tier 6 that basically is what happened last spring?
Well, we won't, yeah, we don't want to be negative and talk about a Tier 6 or, you know, our board has looked at some of the other options. People will ask this question, well, have you looked at, you know, maybe moving to spring like some of the other state associations and some of the colleges have? And we have, but right now we're saying those kids in spring had to lose their whole season last year. So right now, where we're at, we believe we can have fall. But that could be an option in the future to say, you know, we're going to try to look at that, but hopefully we won't get to that point.
One of the things that people will notice right away is no multi-team events like the soccer jamboree in Great Falls or your conference or non-conference preseason volleyball tournaments and stuff like that. Important to not have that many teams at this point in time gathered together.
Absolutely. That was a real important thing for me to say, that if we're going to make sure that the disease is not going to be easily transmitted, you don't want to bring a ton of kids together in one spot. In regard to the sport and how the sport's played, that's important, because if you look at football, we have some junior varsity jamborees. There's just too many kids there at one site. You have, you know, some soccer jamborees, same thing. Then you look at volleyball. You can have those multi-team events that have a lot of teams there that are there all day long, constantly, you know, in contact with each other. That's something we have to limit. The question will be then, how can you have a multi-team cross-country or a multi-team golf? And it's very easy because you have less chance of transmission. For example, in cross country, we have a very strict regimen that they're going to have to go through in regard to being in their own team staging area, masked. Then before they go to the starting line in a corral, masked. Then they're going to a starting line, no more than 25, depending on how, you know, if they can handle 25. If they can't, it'll be less. And then we're going to start. Once they're done, they're gone. They exit and do not congregate. And they only are out there for about 30 to 40 minutes. So the chance of transmission is lower in that type of thing. The same thing for golf. We're going to be at, for an 18-hole course, 95 on each hole. However, when they come, they're going to have to do a shotgun start, no congregation at the clubhouse. They'll have to have a point of entry coming in from different areas of the course to those holes, and then the 5 kids will have to play from the same team. We usually mix them up. The top scorers play with each other. No more. It's going to be from the same team, so then now we're minimizing that risk of transmission again.
The other question you'll get is, what about when we get to postseason volleyball, district, divisional, state tournaments, a lot of teams combined? Any of those events, volleyball is the one that really comes to mind, being indoors with a bunch of teams. Could we see a different format depending on where we're at then?
Definitely, because we'll keep evaluating where we're at in regard to the virus and the number of cases and all that. And if we get to that point where we're at districts, we don't want to bring, for example, 8 teams into one location and have that risk. Then we'd look at a playoff structure like we do for, you know, the AA had done volleyball and basketball and, you know, those different sports, softball playoffs for a long time before they went to a divisional, and it works. 1 plays 8, you know, at the highest seeds, 2 plays 7, highest seed hosts. And then we go through there. We're not making any of those decisions at this time, though. We're going to wait and see where we're at when we get to that particular point.
it's also going to be up to the local city, county health, and then ultimately up to the schools to propose hosting events, like even a regular season volleyball match. Your county might not allow for obviously the full house, but it might be capped somewhere where they have to decide how many tickets each player or whatever it is. First come, first serve. I don't know what the best way to go, but is that ultimately going to be up to the host school to determine this is how many people we can handle? That's just where we're at with our local
Right.
health department.
For the fans, it was an easy recommendation for me to make to our board, because going through the Legion baseball season and following that, each site had different county regulations saying you can have this many or you can do this or that, which that's their call. So we want to make sure we leave it there so the schools can work with them, submit plans like the baseball teams had to do and get those approved. And so then the determination of the number of tickets, we made this clear in all the summer meetings when we went out and spoke to the schools during the summer. This probably could be coming, so work on it through your district policies, or your division and classification policy, that this is what we think might be the best way to go.
And then social distancing, obviously, was mentioned multiple times in the letter. Things like football, extending the box where the kids can stand farther apart, the coaches and stuff like that. Volleyball, you already mentioned cross country. Like as soon as you're done, you're back on your team bus. Golf, You're golfing with your teammates. How important is that aspect of trying to prevent this as much as possible so there's no shutdowns, delays, entire teams that have to quarantine and cancel events?
Well, it's pretty simple that if we want to play and we want to continue to play, we got to follow these rules and guidelines. The things that will get you in trouble that I know and everyone knows is when all of a sudden those become lax and we don't follow those and then we have a case or whatever. That's when we're going to have a problem. So hopefully I believe that our kids, they want to play. Our coaches are ready to put these requirements into place. Our administrators are going to enforce these. I really believe that because everybody wants to play. We don't want to get sabotaged and have the fall season, go like our spring.
As contagious as this is, I think we'd be all kidding ourselves if we didn't expect it to somewhere interrupt a school, a team, just one individual, whatever it is. In that instance, what do we look at for an entire team having to get tested or whatever it might be? For that program to be able to carry on with their season, should that happen, what are those guidelines going to look like?
Sure. We're going to leave that. Some states have put in a mandatory quarantine and all that, but we're going to leave that to the experts. The experts are your local health departments, and some have a little different. They're not much different, but if there's a local team that has it or has a case, or they may quarantine the kid out of the particular house, maybe dad has it or something. There's all kinds of different scenarios. So we're going to let that happen there. But if they're quarantined, let's say the entire team is quarantined for 14 days, then they can come back and resume play once their local health department, through whatever requirements, they're going to get tested maybe twice or whatever that may be, they can return to play. And then the conferences will have to look at adjusting seating accordingly.
You know the literature better than I do. What's going to bring the things that we haven't already discussed, what else is going to bring the most questions to your email inbox, your phone line?
Well, I think there'll be a worry about how we're changing how some of these sports are being played, especially volleyball and the multi-team events, and going to see the different competitors or competition and all that. Same thing with golf. So I think we're getting we'll get questions about that. So I'm thinking that it should be okay to go ahead full bore. Well, we're proceeding cautiously, and I think we're proceeding on the side of, we're going to err on the side of caution. So there'll be some questions about that. Then they'll ask about what if, a team can't play and is quarantined. Then in that case, it'll be no contest. They're not going to be forfeits. If a team decides they don't want to go to a certain area where contests are allowed to be played by their local health department, that will then be a forfeit. It's just so that we have those things clear. But the one thing I will mention is Iowa has high school softball and baseball during the summer. They just finished their high school baseball tournament this past weekend, and it went well. During the season, I think they had 7 or 8 teams that had to be quarantined they have, a lot more high schools than we do. It all went well. Their tournament went well. Things went really well. So we're really pleased to hear that. because of the number of people, of course, the comparison to where we're at in Montana. We think that's a great example.
Could you see, like, we're talking about socially distancing and limited attendance participation, could there be that no crowds admitted type thing if it came down to it, to let these kids be able to play? Is that an option?
I think that is an option, especially in some communities. If there's a high rate of cases or whatever, I think they might be able to say no fans. The one good thing about that is we have, I think, 139 of our schools have the Pixelot cameras through the National Federation network, and that's exciting so that people will still be able to see the games. And then a lot of people don't know this, but the NFHS network actually will provide a free camera to every high school in the state that doesn't have one. In fact, every high school in the United States that doesn't have one. And I think we're up to maybe 15 to 20 schools that have requested that. So there will be options if that ever comes to be.